Hi, welcome to the fourth episode of Initializing AI, where we discuss all things tech and AI. And as always, we have Mayuresh Krishna, co founder of initializ.ai, here with us. Again, this is a virtual episode, and we'll see what has been going on. So, MK, hi, how have you been?
Hey Nakshay, I've been great working on multiple things, trying to get features out to the customers, working with the customers. We had New York Tech Week and then Atlanta Tech Week. So we have had a pretty packed last month, I would say.
Yeah, I saw that post about your Gen AI workshop.
Yeah, we launched our AI assistants along with the agentic framework. So we did a workshop at New York Tech Week as well as Atlanta Tech Week. We got pretty good interest in the workshops. We had a lot of people show up. We did live workshops so people could try it out themselves. So it was fun.
Isn't Gen AI still at that stage where it's not able to access dynamic data? Because that is one of the main concerns people have usually with these things, right?
If you think of it, that was the challenge which industry is trying to solve, and there were multiple ways they were getting at it. I think initially it started off with tools use or tool use. You can even call it as early days. It was like function use sort of thing that somehow you can wire up with your models, calling to an API or calling to a function, calling to some sort of a backend to get more dynamic real-time data. And then people did things like memory, like you had asynchronous way of updating your memory so that your models have some more context. There were several solutions which have been going on in industry. Like how do you provide more contextual data, real time, dynamically to anything which is happening or any interaction.
I'm sure it came up even during a workshop, but like, how do you guys with your assistant like bridge that gap? Like, how does your assistant access live data? Because that is one of the needs of the hour, right? So, do you have some protocol
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
follow?
One of the things which Anthropic started, and then a lot of folks in the industry have started contributing to it, is a specification around like how this should happen. Early on, everybody was trying to figure out how do we make live API calls or function calls or tool calls, and there weren't much standard way of doing it. Imagine we go back in time where we did not really have any specification for APIs, even before, say, SOAP. Web services and APIs early on had construct around SOAP, and then we went to REST APIs, and before that, we did some RPCs. But these specifications were made so that there are some standards around like how would you interact with two systems through an application programming interface. So same thing came about with models, right? How do models talk to other systems? And APIs are built, or API specifications were built for a typed integration between two systems where somebody codes that I want to talk to this API and these are the inputs I'm going to give and this is the output I'm going to get. Models are different. Like models are trying to, in real time, figure out like how should we send the request to the backend or this particular system. So that dynamic way of understanding the system and sending the information to it, that was not very, or you can say the API spec directly did not support that construct.
Yeah.
So
In fact, like that was the
yeah,
issue
so
with ChatGPT as well, right? Like initially. Now I
yeah.
think their 4.0 model allows you to do web search and all. But initially that was one of the main problems, which I think Perplexity solved.
What I would say, web search is not necessarily a solution for what was happening. Web search is like another integration point, right? So think of it as like web search was model had fixed memory based on like when it was last trained. Anything new, it wouldn't know. And web search enabled that by doing the live web search over the information which is there. So apart from what model has, plus the web search gave it additional capability of bringing back live real-time data. Now, web search is one other integration point. So how did they talk to web search is where the whole construct of tool use and function use came into play. So ChatGPT did it on its own way. Perplexity did web search in its own way. So eventually, then Anthropic came up with this specification that instead of everybody doing these dynamic API calls in their own way and figuring out how models will integrate with it, they kind of started putting together this specification. How would you create an interface between models and these different other systems where you would want to make the API calls or function calls. A lot of other organizations then came together and started participating in that specification. The whole idea of that specification is to provide the model a very standard way of understanding what capabilities this particular endpoint has. And then model can, based on that, decide how to send the request to it. You create the API integration which that particular system might have. For example, you want to talk to Salesforce or you want to talk to a database or any of these systems. Think of it as anything which has an API. You can provide an MCP layer in front of it where the MCP acts as a
Bridge.
specification which will give the models information about how you can talk to, say, this particular system like Salesforce. These are the functionalities which Salesforce or say Slack provides. You want to send a message, it has that capability and it sends that information to the model in a very standard way that these are different Slack capabilities you can interact with. And then model can choose to decide when you ask a question, give me the answer about this and send that message to Slack. Right. So model can then based on that decide, okay, I have this MCP connection with me for Slack, and I understand that I can send a message to Slack, so I will use that particular connection. What is available to it so that it can make the decision of making that dynamic integration. And what, if you really think of it, how is it different than APIs? APIs have been very typed integration typically, right? So now with MCP, models can dynamically decide what to call and how to call it and how to invoke it. In a sense, if you add additional APIs to your MCP specification, models will automatically recognize that and it can start using additional endpoints. Or if you change the APIs with the specification, models will automatically know that and you don't have to code the model to now talk to a new API in a different way. That's the kind of intelligence now is there through this MCP specification.
So this MCP, as you mentioned, is like the model context protocol, right?
Yeah,
So can you tell us what exactly is specified in that protocol? As you mentioned, this is the architecture and the deployment part, right? So
yeah,
what
yeah.
did Anthropic solve for? What is the one thing that sort of brought this uniformity, you would say?
Is like how of providing what this endpoint can do for you. So generally you will create an MCP server and then in the MCP server, you'll define the specification. You say what are the different tools available in this particular specification. So think of it as when any model now connects to any kind of tools, through MCP server, the first thing they ask to that particular tool is what is available for me. That particular MCP server sends back a catalog. So think of it as like you are going to a shopping store and a shopping store is giving you a catalog. These are the things which are available with me. The model asks the MCP server what is available with you, and then an MCP server responds back with a very standard catalog of saying, okay, these are the things which are available with me. So now the model has the understanding of what is available for it to call.
Your analogies are always very fun and make sense on their own so much.
You could go around in the store and browse and figure out like what do you want to
Yeah.
buy. But if you get a very standard catalog, okay, these are the things which we have. If you go to a clothing store, don't ask me for a wrench to fix my car.
So, what would you say are the disadvantages of this?
It is yet another specification, which is yet another thing for industry to use. You can say it's had its good and bad of it. We are in a very fast-paced era, right? Everything is evolving so quickly, and the speed at which everything adopted is also pretty fast. MCP at this point does not really have a good security and authentication and authorization mechanism in the specification defined yet. There's backlog and issues being worked on to define that specification. I think it's going to come out pretty soon. But the very first reaction to it was, okay, let's use it. A lot of people started using MCP with their cloud desktop or other tools, other models as well, and does not have any security construct. And what that means is if I want to talk to Slack, I will put in my API key to talk to Slack and host this MCP server. But this MCP server is now available if I expose it over the internet. This is available freely to anyone. If somebody can get to that URL, there's no authentication. And now somebody can talk to my Slack easily without any authorization, right? So
Yeah.
the security protocol is not really well set. Plus, the with all of these endpoints getting invoked through models, there is a lot more now need of better observability around what are these models doing with these different integration endpoints, and what is coming, what is being sent to that, what is the actual data behind it. So the observability becomes a much more critical need so that you can at least trace back to when something happened, why it happened.
And how does Initialize deal with it? I'm sure you guys also are incorporating the MCP in your models, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, what are the countermeasures that you are taking as a company?
We were building out the agentic workflow and we were looking at ways to integrate with these systems. We started using MCP, and what we did on top of it, because of the lack of the security authentication in the specification when we started using it, we built an authentication layer, or you can say we on our platform we already have an authentication and authorization layer. We put MCP behind it, right? So we pulled, if you think of it, in front of the MCP specification, we put our authentication layer. So if you create an MCP server on our platform, it gets backed behind our platform's authentication authorization. So whatever server gets exposed, it first hits our authentication layer. If you are registered and authorized to use that MCP server on our platform, that's only you can use it. Whether we use it within our agentic workflow or we expose that MCP server for you to be using it with any other external tools, you can do that by providing our platform's authentication to get in.
That's really smart and elegantly resolving the issue at its starting point itself.
Yeah, yeah, and as the specification evolves and it provides the ability to natively send that across, it still
Yeah.
works exactly same way for us. We'll have to do is remove that custom layer of injecting the authorization header before making a call. Instead, it will be automatically available through the specification, and the way people are consuming MCP servers with our platform now will not change. It will stay the same. They'll come in with the authorization header, we'll authenticate them, and then we'll allow the call to.
Where else do you think people are engaging with MCPs on a daily basis?
I would say there are a few which are very well known ones. Like, for example, if you're using Perplexity, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure is using quite a bit of MCP for their integrations at this point. A lot of developers or people who are using things like Cloud Desktop, they're already using MCP to integrate with their own integration points. In a sense that, for example, if I want to pull information from GitHub, send information to Slack, you can personally host an MCP server and use it. A lot of users who are using things like Cloud Desktop or Cursor, they're hosting their own MCP server and consuming it. And then any organization or companies who are building agents and agentic workflow, they are looking at trying to use MCP for their integrations. That would be, I would say, more of either a startup use case or a product provider use case, or more of an internal enterprise or organization use case where they're trying to figure out how do we use MCP to integrate with some of these things. For example, within our platform, we have started to use MCP in our agentic workflow. So we provide an option for a user to come in and drop an MCP, configure an MCP server, and within the workflow, drop that MCP integration in their workflow and said, okay, as part of this call, I want to connect to this MCP server. With the prompt, I want to send the result of the prompt or the model call to this particular MCP server.
And while they're doing this, what would you say is the most unexpected detail that they should keep in mind? Other than, of course, the security aspect that we already
Yeah.
discussed. Do you think there's this one word of caution that you can give them at the enterprise level, especially?
Yeah, I think one thing which everybody has to be cautious about is we're connecting to, if you really think of it in the world of agents, assistants, or even just AI, one of the things which is not very deterministic is the answer which a language model will give you. In a sense, you can try to get your temperature to a point where it can give you deterministic output, but still you'll not have a 100% guarantee of that. Because of the non-deterministic nature of language models, you have to be aware that when you're integrating these systems with a language model in generative AI, language model is your primary core intelligence per se, right? So you have to be aware that it is not going to be a deterministic result for everything which you ask. There has been constant tests which has been done, for example, mathematical scoring tests which these models go through. But if you really think of it, Apple came back with another test recently where all of the models failed spectacular. They were completely bad at doing math. Apple even published that any of these models, they don't really do thinking. There's no reasoning here. It's just prediction. And what I mean by that is the standard of these tests as well are not as complex as where if you put a human in front of that kind of a complex question and how a human would answer versus how these models are doing the predictions and answering. So
So
non-deterministic nature of it causes your now instead of to begin with where we had Q&A sort of thing, you were chatting with it and giving an answer, then you would analyzing that, okay, oh, is this right or not? Is the model hallucinating or not? Now you are autonomously integrating with these different systems with MCPs. So you have to be aware when you do these things, the non-deterministic approach of the language model can result to outputs which are not exactly what you were expecting, right? So you could make an API call to something where it triggers launch a promotion campaign suddenly where all tickets on the airlines are $1 and your business class is selling out, right? So you could have these kind of things, right? You're integrating your critical systems with MCP layer and you're relying on model to take actions. And if their model kind of hallucinates or does something which you were not expecting, then you might have consequences which you have to manage. So you'll have to put some guardrails around it, like how do you do these things?
as you mentioned, these are all like non-deterministic systems, which means the
Yeah.
problems that arise are unpredictable. Do you have any tips and tricks on how to manage these consequences? Do you have
Yeah.
any examples of such guardrails that you can be
Yeah,
putting
yeah,
on?
models for guardrails as well. But I would rather say that apart from using any kind of non-deterministic way of applying guardrails, we should still apply deterministic way of doing guardrails. In your workflow, apply a deterministic guardrail where you take the result of these models and apply a logic to determine what you want to do with it before you let that model and actually make the call to your end system. So behavior, I'm going to change my campaign. I let the model decide based on the behavior data. And but before it actually makes the change to campaign, I have a deterministic function which validates whether, okay, by the way, is the price going less than X amount? And I do a deterministic guardrail around that. Same way it goes into things like PII, PCI data. How do you protect and guardrail those? What we have been doing is, apart from applying model-based guardrails, we apply deterministic guardrails as well. Because from enterprise perspective, maybe we get to a point where we can have much more stable and predictable approach of language-based or generative AI-based guardrails. But at this point, deterministic function-based guardrails works best to avoid these consequences or after effects which you were not expecting, along with the observability and traceability, right? So you have both the things. You apply the function-based guardrail and you have the traceability of what actually happened to give confidence on that I can allow these things to happen because I have some of these gatekeepers helping me out.
It seems like practice makes not just man, but even AI perfect.
Yeah. And I would say that probably humans get better faster with practice than AI.
Fair enough. So, say if we built a time machine right now and
Yeah.
travel to a few years in the future, how do you think like these adapters will evolve? These are adapters, right? Like context adapters, basically.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
as you said, sometimes AI with practice gets worse. So, where do you see this going?
If you think of it, it's still early. Not everything is available through MCP. A lot of example, we build the MCP layer for a lot of integrations ourselves, and it is more of a you can think like additional task of making that happen. If you really go back to the past when the APIs came about, not everybody provided APIs, right? But now it is like de facto, it's expected. If you're not providing an API layer, nobody will actually talk to you. You can sell your beautiful GUI, but if you don't have an API specification, nobody will buy your product. Eventually, that will happen with MCP as well. So every provider will have their own official MCP out there. So you don't have to build it yourself. You can directly integrate with them. We ourselves don't see MCP as like a core thing within our platform that people would use. It's like a stopgap until we have all these providers providing their own MCP servers. But eventually, all the APIs which are being provided as an API spec will also be provided as MCP. So you would see a lot more autonomous integrations with language models across the systems. you would also see a lot more weird behaviors, right? Again, going back to the construct of when we initially started APIs, we looked at things like, okay, protect around sensitive data, right? Everybody built constructs around compliances and things like that. Same similar thing will happen on the MCP side. Like along with this newer nature of interacting with systems, how do you apply the compliances? How do you apply the guardrails? How do you manage the scale of this happening? The one other thing which earlier didn't happen was you had to actually code to make a new integration happen. Now you don't really have to code that much. You just have to create a specification, almost like a registry, and that's it. Now, as soon as you bring new things and your specification gets updated, now models can start interacting with it. So you will have much more traffic going into these systems at a scale which probably we didn't do with just APIs. So the scale will increase as well. And then all these systems will have to handle that different level of scale with AI talking to it.
Well, keeping all of these things in mind, if you had the chance to reimagine Anthropic's MCP, what changes would you introduce to it?
I feel that when Anthropic started working on that, they did not think of it as becoming a really specification for all integrations around AI and non AI system. What I would say is if I had to go back and think about what could have been different, I would have started from security first. I would have started from the construct of how do you quickly build out an MVP and get it out there to use the functionality. So if I have to go back and reimagine, I would predict that future and start from security first, and then
Yeah.
at least some basic level of security applied so that I can start building on top of it. But again, the speed at which we are going in the industry, it's going to come pretty fast.
Yeah. That's actually very aligned with Initialize's emphasis on observability and all of that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's one of the main difference which we call out is one is like you can do
Yeah.
things through simplicity, to the ease. What
Yeah.
we bring to the table is security along with the ease. We
Yeah.
keep the simplicity, but we bake in the security so that you can actually use it in production. You can actually use it with your customers in production.
Before we close, I'm just like very curious about one thing. As we know that agentic AI is up and coming, right? So
Yeah,
at some point, I'm sure that context utilization will also become autonomous and selective, right? Like no matter how what and how much context has been sent through that live connection, at
right.
some point models will be able to pick and choose, right? So wouldn't that
Yeah, for
essentially
sure.
solve the issue of hallucination if they can just pick the right information?
Instead of we choosing that what context to provide, we can kind of start giving a lot of context which is there in this live connections which we have to the model, and it can choose like how to react to it, how to use it, how to determine what's the right context to use.
So are we there in
We are there, but I don't think so that's going to solve the hallucination. That could
okay.
even add to the hallucination. Now you're giving it a lot more data, you're giving it a lot more context to have more understanding. But as this grows, it also hits some of the limitations around what are the limitations of the model to keep the context in memory. For example, one of the things which some of the models are facing on the code generation side of the use case is you have models with 1 million token capacity, like context capacity. And if you have a code base which has a million lines of code, then the model is not going to be able to understand the entire context to be able to actually write the right code. If you have a million lines of code which you need to have context of to be able to generate right set of function or code or next step which you're creating, you need to have probably 100 million token context space to be able to do that. So as we add more context to it, the models have to also expand how to manage and be able to actually have the capacity to talk that context. And as you expand that, you need to have more capacity on the servers and machines as well to be able to process that.
I'm guessing it
So
will
it's
take a lot more energy as well and not end up
and it will
becoming
take a lot more energy
sustainable.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
no way that can be sustainable.
yeah. I don't know. I think we'll also have to look at like how do you change the whole construct of electricity. We have to go to the next generation of electricity, I think, in power generation.
Well, I think that can be a topic for some other time. Thank you so much, MK. It was really great talking to you. We'll maybe reconnect again in the next episode.
Absolutely. Great talking to you, Nakshi.
See you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Build on Initialize. Try it today.